Here we go.
We're ready.
We're doing it. First show, Vedic Wisdom Unfiltered.
Our first episode.
Yeah, so episode one, and I'm Sita Severson,
And I'm Chloe Willard.
and we are here to talk about obviously Vedic wisdom, but we're really going to go all over the place. I know I have a very yogic background as well, which is not to be confused with Vedic, and we'll definitely talk about that. And we both have the tantric lineages too, so there's a lot to talk about that's not all technically Vedic. Um but again, that's part of why we want to have this show. So
Yeah.
it's
We're
been sort of bubbling for a while. So what are you excited about for this show?
I'm really excited to be able to give people a space where they can access some authentic teachings and find guidance for life and health and balancing that's reliable and traditional and authentic and really is applicable to daily life and accessible. That's what I'm really excited about because there's so much out there that is really dogmatic in the Vedic world, and especially in the field of Ayurveda and Ayurvedic, Westernized Ayurvedic practice, that there's so much that's become dogmatic with all the food lists and the strict daily routines and whatnot. And I'm really excited to teach people about how these forms of wisdom can offer, well-being for life and in ways that aren't dogmatic, that actually free us from all of that, that let us experience greater freedom instead of, another form of restriction, which all of us, fundamentally, I think, are trying to get rid of restriction and feel more free, but we end up sometimes getting locked into these structures that inhibit us in ways we don't like. So I'm excited to offer that accessibility to people and teach folks about how to apply the Vedic wisdom and so many Vedic teachings in their daily life, in ways that actually work with their daily life instead of trying to overhaul their entire life structure to accommodate something that's not compatible. So yeah, I'm excited about all of that. There's so much that we're going to get into, as we've been really conversing about this for a while, and I'm so excited about all these things that we want to share. What about you? What are you excited about sharing?
Of course, I echo exactly everything that you just said. And, I think the thing that I'm most excited about is really, I'm kind of going to say what you said, but I'll say it in my words. Supporting people who are genuinely wanting to have a home coming back to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, while I feel it is human nature and just part of the ride of being in this 3D realm, basically, um, is looking for outside sources to bring us back into ourselves. And I feel that so many of the current models, like you were just talking about, and beyond just the examples that you used, are unfortunately putting people in a position where they're not recognizing how to take that wisdom and bring it back into themselves. There are things that they will practice, but ultimately it's that thing that still has more power than they do, is sort of the way we're groomed to show up into these specific modalities. And I feel that when we go into the purity of the teachings, of Vedic wisdom and its sisters and cousins, and we look at them from their truest perspective, that's where the potency of true life is. That's where we can understand that, just like, the trees and the plants and the animals of nature, we too have our own rhythms, and no one else is going to be able to dogmatize us into something like that. There is no specific regimen, prescription that's going to fit for a group of people. It's just not the way nature is. We all have patterns that can be similar to other people because that's also the way nature is. So there are similarities between us and others. And at the end of the day, if we aren't really like nurturing and exploring and discovering and being with and not shaming or making wrong in any capacity our own rhythms and letting ourselves just sort of unfold and unfurl into them, that's where the true essence of this mind body spirit stuff that everybody hears about, that seems very theoretical and
Yeah.
also seems very nebulous because everybody's trying to chase this balance of mind body spirit. And it's like, guys, it's nothing to chase, it's something in here, it's inherent in here. And the true modalities that are going to point you into here to find that harmony within all of your realms is really going to come from the purity of the true teachings, and not the different ways that we have tried to alter them to meet the modern world, which might sound crazy, but I think the more you and I get to talk about these topics, the more it's so easy to see that even this wisdom from thousands and thousands and thousands and beyond years ago is timeless. And that's why for me, it's like a capital T truth, because it doesn't matter what time frame we're in, it doesn't matter what cycle of the collective we're in, it rings true every step of the way and without fail. And so I'm really excited to help, well, just to have these awesome conversations with you, because you and I go places, and so it's just going to be fun to do that. But to really help people have these perspectives and start having these conversations and being really educated, for other practitioners who really want to they want to be in that purity, but they don't know where to find it, or for um people who need the support of practitioners. Like, how do you even discern and decide, like, how it there, like you said, there's so much noise out there. Like, how do people actually educate themselves when everyone is like, oh, me, pick me, I have the way, I have the secret. It's almost like being at a circus and deciding which, like, house of mirrors to go in. And so, and I'm not saying that you and I are better than anything or anyone else, but what I am saying is I feel that you and I come at it from a place of purity and experience, not just with ourselves, but also with our clients. And so I think there's something to be said about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because there's so much even in the Ayurvedic wellness world, right? Where people are trying to brand Ayurveda, which to me is crazy because it's a science. And how do you brand a science? I mean, it's a medical science that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. And we all learn the teachings of that science if we're actually learning it. Like, if we're actually learning Ayurveda, right? Then we're all learning the same
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So then how do you brand, and why do we even need to do that? Right. I mean, that to me is just like, I mean, that I think is one of the things that causes that confusion, is people trying to brand this ancient science that's an entire medical system. It doesn't need branding. Like, it's great as it is. The wisdom is there. And like you said, it's timeless. We can always go to that wisdom and receive what we need. But when people try to brand it and kind of put their own spin on it, they're extracting it from its context and its lineage and that purity of teaching, and they're taking the parts that they like, leaving the parts that they don't like, and they're totally creating their own thing, which is no longer Ayurveda then, right? And then so I think that's, people really do want the results of healing that Ayurveda can truly offer, but we can't access them through that mechanism of, extracting what we like and kind of leaving what we think is like
Yeah.
outdated, right? So, so many people are trying to like modernize Ayurveda or brand their own Ayurveda, um, which is, you know, it's kind of harmful in a lot of ways, because then we end up taking it out of its original context, and we leave behind a lot of elements that people actually need in order for them to be effective. Like the just one thing that comes up to me immediately is the dosha food list model, right? Where people are saying, here's your dosha food list and eat for your dosha. But the context of Ayurveda says eat for your dosha vikruti, which means like your dosha condition right now. And not only that, your digestive dosha right now. And our digestive dosha, which is our like digestive, you know this, but just people listening may
Yeah,
not
yeah, of
know,
course.
our digestive energy in the moment, like how our digestion is functioning in the moment is our digestive dosha vikruti. So when we're eating for that, that changes based on our emotional experiences, based on our like ups and downs emotionally. It changes based on our life events. It changes based on season, right?
Mhm.
So if we have this dosha food list and we're eating off this same dosha food list every day, which is how most of people in the United States are promoting Ayurveda, is like take your dosha food list and eat from it all the time. It's no wonder that people aren't experiencing health and healing from that approach, because that's not really what the authentic Ayurvedic teachings say, right?
Mhm.
It says learn how to listen to your body. And what is your body telling you is going on that you need in that day, in that moment, in that life experience, or in that season? And that's a whole different kind of wisdom where we are really bringing that trust back to our body and saying, I can trust my body and I can relearn the language of my body. So my body's telling me, hey, I'm feeling anxious today. And I know these foods that bring me a more earthy energy. So I can eat those and feel more steady. Or I can say, I'm feeling really irritable and hot tempered today. So what foods do I need to cool that temper down? And this is the wisdom that the authentic Ayurveda offers us, where these westernized approaches of like the dosha food list, they don't offer us the results that the
Mhm.
wisdom offers. Like, because we're then eating the same static diet in every season, in as all of our needs are changing, and we're like, no, I'm doing this one thing, but it's like we need so many different things. And so I love the authentic traditional Ayurveda because it honors our truth as dynamic beings, right? It honors us, and it tells us that we do have these cyclical rhythms that we can learn how to not manage but honor, right? And the like the westernized approach is more like, let's think in our heads about what we think we should be and then try to use parts of Ayurveda to make us be like what we think we should be. But the original Ayurveda is like, no, look at who you are and learn to celebrate who you are, which to me is so freeing in so many ways. I mean, it lets us experience that radical health of the body and healing things that we thought were unhealable. And it allows us to sleep better and to feel more grateful and more joyful in life, and to have more energy and greater mental well-being. I mean, there's just so much offered there. But when we take those little pieces of it out, like the dosha food list thing, and we say, oh, here's what Ayurveda is. It's this one thing, and it's this eating for your dosha, and we're doing that all the time. We don't get those miraculous results that the traditional approach offers. And so I think that's one reason for me why I think it is so important for us to be having these conversations and starting this podcast and getting this wisdom out there for people in a bigger way, because people really are looking for
Mhm.
those big results and those authentic traditional teachings. But most of the approaches out there aren't going to offer them that.
Mhm.
No, it's not. And like you said, it's not like you and I are better than
Mhm.
everybody else. It's just the case that when you take a traditional system of medicine and you extract components and try to just apply those components that seem to fit the modern context, you can't get the results that the whole system promises you because you're not using the whole system, right?
Yeah. You just made me think of so many things. One thing though, this is funny and I have to say it first. Have you seen the movie Spaceballs?
Like a really long time ago.
That is literally one of my favorite movies. It is so ridiculous. But you made me think, and you're talking about like branding stuff, like whatever, like all, all the like this branding, whatever, like people just brand
Yeah.
whatever and then leaving the rest behind. It makes me think of the wealthy kingdom where the king was taking all of the air and he had Perrier. Like he literally
Oh,
branded the air and was keeping it for himself. And there was that point where all the air was being sucked out of the planet and he was sitting at his desk and he's like sniffing the Perrier. Like that's what I
I remember that. That's really funny.
it's like, yes, this is kind of sort of what happens when we're branding things that like we have no business branding. Like this is not ours to brand, people. Um anyway, but So you made me think of a couple of, I feel like, really important things. Like, so I mean, I want to say this first and foremost, that, and I feel like you and I are of the same mind. I'm not against allopathic medicine, and I know that there are healers that are, and I'm not. I am a holistic practitioner. That there is a place for both. And I'm not saying that I run to allopathic medicine. No, but some things require that, and they just do, right? But we can support long-term healing and source like root cause healing with the Ayurvedic stuff. And sometimes we need to throw in some of that allopathic medicine. So I say that because um what you described, or what I heard you describe, is really more of an allopathic model. And the way that I mean that is, a lot of people know this, but I don't think realize to the extent that modern medicine is all based on the wisdom of plants. But the difference is that modern medicine took what they believed to be the one extract or the two things from a particular plant, made a medicine around it. And the reason why there are so many side effects from long-term use of so many medications is because what allopathic medicine doesn't realize is that the brilliance of Ayurveda and really herbalism, true herbalism of, take your pick what kind, because they're all beautiful,
Yeah.
um, is that it's the whole plant and how it all works together in unison. And it's not just the extractions itself. Those active ingredients, yeah, those are like, the top part, but they have all of these other supporting things, these nuanced things in nature that make the whole thing effective. And so without that, we start having more side effects. So to me, what you're describing about, oh, just, your pitta dosha, okay, well then forever and eternity, like, don't eat a red chili, for the love of God, don't eat spicy foods, because you'll just get really pissed off, you know what I mean? um and so to me, that's that allopathic approach, where it's, we can't just be reductionistic and take, oh, okay, I'm this, and so I do that. And then that's the end of the story. Because when we miss the true holism of what it's all about, we miss the harmony, because we don't have the intelligence of the totality of what we're actually working with. So even these extractions that we're seeing in how people are working with Ayurveda, quote unquote, these days, is doing that. And so what I think is interesting is, I think of people who will, let's say someone, because this is a big thing these days, they want to lose weight. And so they lose the weight and they get the body they want, but then their skin's breaking out and they're totally flatulent and gassy. And they start having issues with insomnia. They love how they look, but essentially they're kind of miserable in different ways. This is the kind of stuff we're seeing happening more and more and more and more and more, because we are, the digestive system, of course, in Ayurveda is everything. um but that's sort of what starts to happen when people are following these, I'm just going to call it more of that allopathic model, in a place that is meant to be more holistic. Because even all this Ayurvedic like skincare stuff that's coming out, I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you're not dealing with your digestion and you're not dealing with what's going on in your gut, I don't care how expensive or how great that Ayurvedic cream is, it doesn't matter. You may see some results, but until you actually get to the source of these things and what's going on, if someone really does need to lose weight, not from cultural programming, but really does, they're carrying too much toxin in their body. There is a very big distinction of carrying ama, or toxic material, versus being overweight. They're not synonymous, and people don't understand this half the time, that if there is a true reason for someone to lose weight and they do it working with the root cause of what their body is being intelligent. First of all, if you're carrying extra weight, there is some intelligence that has been sparked in your body that's trying to overcompensate somewhere, right? So maybe it's not the result that we want, but your body is saying, I'm activated right now because I know I'm supposed to be doing something, right? And so when we go into that root and we don't extract the things that we want and we work with the whole picture, what we get is a person who is the weight that their body is supposed to be, their healthy weight, not all of that toxic stuff. Their skin's going to clear up, they're not going to have gas and bloating, and they're not going to be dealing with crazy insomnia. It's just true. And I don't want to say like, oh, it's the cure all, like Ayurveda will cure everything. I'm just trying to use examples that are so like we just see this all the time. And it to me, it's such a farce. It's like people are constantly trying to chase this idea of health because, okay, I took care of this one thing. Oh, and now this other thing is cropped up. And they don't realize that they're all connected. You didn't take care of that first thing. You dulled the symptoms, but because the root is still going on in there, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. It just showed up somewhere else. That's
Yep.
that's what it does.
Yeah, because the body will not lie to us. And
Never.
it's so interesting because it's so synchronous, this conversation and the way it's unfolding. Because this morning, as I was doing my morning practice and my morning walk, I do that in the mornings, and I usually kind of record, voice record reflections for myself, just whatever's coming through to process in the moment. And what I was recording was about how mind over matter approaches to health don't work,
Mm,
which is a lot of what you're just talking about, where cultural programming tells us this is how I should look body wise, or this is what my health should look like. And then we mentally decide what we should look like, what we should be, and how do we get from here to there.
mhm.
But Ayurveda does it differently, where it's not about deciding in our heads what we should be and do and look like. It's about going back to who we are first.
It's the
So it's
medicine
not
of experience, is what I
right.
call it.
Yeah. And it's not about saying, like, what should my body be weight wise? It's about listening to the body, like you just said, and saying, what is my body telling me with what it's doing, whatever that is, whether it's carrying extra weight or anything else. It's about really trusting our bodies as wise communicators, because they are. And
Yeah.
if we trust that and listen to it, we can really get somewhere deeper in the healing realm than if we start from our heads and say, here's what it should be and how do I make it that. Right? And that's where we get to those really allopathic approaches, where we're saying, like with the weight example, just what should I weigh and how do I make myself weigh that? And we don't even question first with that approach, what does my body want to be? Like, where is my body comfortable?
Mhm.
And what does my bone structure suggest that my body shape is when I'm healthy? And if
And
I
for different ages too.
exactly. And do I need to be the same size and shape I was when I was 20 and I'm now 45? Well, no. Can we allow for cyclical change and evolution of ourselves at different moments of life?
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is another like one of the most beautiful parts of Ayurveda is truly honoring the different cycles on like microcosm, macrocosm is just really being there for it. And I think it is like you and I understand, and I know a lot of people do, because a lot of people, women in particular, but people, women, let's say specified biological women, you can be anything for this one, but we inherently are groomed to abandon our bodies and abandon ourselves and programmed for that, many of us, not all of us.
Think you're saying like people who are socialized, like people say you're a woman and I'm going to socialize you that way, like whatever the
Yes.
person's gender is. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that happens with weight. I mean, we're all bombarded with so much cultural conditioning around all of that, our bodies, our genders, our all the things. And so I think one of the reasons why true Ayurvedic medicine can sometimes feel daunting and threatening is because it really does run so counter to the ways that many of us have been conditioned,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like for an individual, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and so it in that sense it really is like a radical approach to health, even though it's the simplest approach to health in my opinion. It is literally the simplest approach, because and with the highest level of intelligence, because it is the true honoring of the cycles of nature. That is what it is, and all that comes from it. And in the world that we're in, we most of us have been conditioned away from that. Where, we, even if it's like being taught how to comply, many of us are taught how to comply very early on. It's a survival skill that we learn that unfortunately a lot of us don't grow out of for a very long time, if ever. But part of that compliance is, what do I look like? Who do I need to be? How do I need to show up? It's like life is performative versus being truly honest and authentic. And to me, that's the sweet spot of where we start to find true health, is where we can start to tap in and resource ourselves with that high level of intelligence that's all always existed in here. It's just, for some of us, it's been dormant on in different levels in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I like that you're mentioning that because it is that awakening of part of us that's already there. And so it's a way of opening up space for things that we already are authentically to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way, Ayurveda does offer us a lot of that. And because it does run out contrary to our cultural conditioning in a lot of ways,
Yep.
you're right. It can feel like a big shift, and it can feel intimidating to some people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is another reason I'm excited that we're doing this, because it can help folks who feel intimidated by it to access it, little by little, and
Yeah.
start applying the Vedic wisdom to daily life. Even just sitting with the things we're talking about now is beneficial to people, because it's opening up space in the mind for perspective shifting. And then, when we shift perspectives, our beliefs change and our identities change. And then, of course, nobody's going to do an action that contradicts their identity. So as we change, perception and belief, then our identities shift, and then we open up space for those new healing actions that we really do want to take. But it doesn't have to be. I think part of why it can be so intimidating is because a lot of folks do present Ayurveda as like, you need to overhaul your whole life right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that you and I do talk about a lot, that we don't need to do that to people. We don't need to meet with somebody in an Ayurvedic session the first time and be like, okay, you need to change all your food,
Yeah,
and you
no.
need to change your entire daily routine. And, even though it's not compatible with your job and you're a teacher and you're on your feet all day, you need to drink a gallon of water, and you can't go to the bathroom because you don't get bathroom breaks as a teacher, but you have to do this. Like,
Yeah.
these are
Yeah.
the things that a lot of people are doing in their Ayurvedic work, and this kind of Westernized allopathic approach. It's like, do all of this stuff right
Yeah.
now. And it really is that mind over matter approach that's like, let's decide the ideal and try to force ourselves to fit.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work, because we might be able to keep that for a short term, but it's not going to last. It won't be
No.
sustainable. And so it won't cultivate our health and support our health and well-being in the long term, because we can't maintain that.
No, and then it then makes people think that it doesn't work, or there's something wrong with them. So if there's
Yeah.
shame, if that's like a shame button for some people, then it
Yep.
just creates more shame. And that, obviously, that is not the path to health. For sure. Like, I know with my clients, I give them phases. So I'm like, here's phase one, here's phase two. And I don't even give them all the pieces. But for people who feel like, oh, I'd like a little bit more, I'm like, okay, but first I want you to work with this part, right? Just pick like a couple of things from this part that just feels super doable for you. You know what I mean? Like, just drink some warm water first thing in the morning. Yeah. If that awesome, great. And so there's a lot of simple things like that. And not being someone who takes a bunch of stuff out of people's lives. It's like, no, let's just add a couple things in. We're not taking anything away. You can have the thing. I don't care. Have fun with the thing. Let's just add a few things in, right? And your body starts to recognize, and eventually the things that we would call like not great for you, or it can cause imbalances for you, oftentimes they'll just see their way out the door when it's time.
Yeah.
It's such a process of unfolding, and I think that is one of the things you and I've talked about everything, but this is one of the things you and I've talked about, is how um you know, I think another challenge when it comes to true Ayurvedic work is that it's not a magic bullet. It's not
Mm.
like I have a headache and I'm going to take an aspirin and my headache's going to go away. It's like, no, we've taken our entire lifetime up until this point to create certain patterns, and it's going to take time for those patterns to unravel and undo themselves. And so I mean, some things, I mean, if something's really acute, some things will change very quickly for people. So that's also true. Um, and there are times where getting into like that deep nitty gritty stuff, it's like, just let the process of intelligence come back to life in you. It's a process, and it's worth it, but it's not just like, here, take this medicine and all's well.
Yeah, and it is a big, I think, cultural contrast because, here in the United States where we are, that is kind of the norm of how we're taught, we're socialized, we're culturally conditioned to approach healing that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we feel something we don't like, we do some healing thing, we feel better, right? But sometimes healing does require us to look at things that are uncomfortable, or to temporarily go through some uncomfortable thing. Like, if we don't exercise, right, our body will become stagnant and we're not used to moving. But it doesn't mean it's bad for us to move. It means that once we start moving more, our body will be sore, we'll feel like muscle soreness. Like, that's uncomfortable, but it's not bad. It's a
Yeah.
benefit, right? So there's and also I think there's a lot of subtle and complex discernment that we're empowering people to engage in, because we're not saying all people need to be uncomfortable to heal, or we're not saying all healing is uncomfortable, because that's not true either. But it is true that if we expect, like, we have a certain expectation of, I'm going to do this and instantly I'm going to feel better and everything I don't like is going to go away, that can often be an unrealistic expectation. So I think one of the things I like about Ayurveda a lot, especially as somebody who has lived a life, as a child with intense abuse experiences and trauma, that to have a way to sit with those uncomfortable things as a means to healing has been really freeing for me. And that's something I do love so much about Ayurveda, because it let me reclaim that truth that it's okay to be uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
Where when you're having these habituated trauma responses from such a young age, it's like you just want to run from everything that's uncomfortable, or you want to make it feel better or different, because as a young child, when you're facing those things, you don't have the mechanisms
Mhm.
to process or to cope. And then at some point in life, what Ayurveda teaches us is that those experiences do store in the body. And at some point, they'll get our attention, and our body will show us that it's time to process them. And it's really important. And then Ayurveda offers us a way to say, hey, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah.
we don't need to say, let's make all these difficult feelings go away, because really, then, sometimes the path to healing is like, just don't fix it, just feel it.
Yeah.
And so I love that we have this really complex and nuanced way to heal, where sometimes, like you said, sometimes certainly, like if I'm working with someone and they need some herbal medicine, we can utilize some herbal formula that I make for them to help them immediately feel better. But at the same time, we would be then working on those root causes that created the patterns to make the health condition, right? So that is why I love Ayurveda so much, because it offers us a way not only to like band-aid the symptoms, which is that more allopathic approach, right? Because certainly people do that. People take the
Sure.
herb and they're like, well, I'll just take this Ayurvedic herb for the rest of my life. And like, that's not healing either.
Yeah.
Because it's just
Yeah.
like using herbal medicine instead of a synthetic pharmaceutical. But the real authentic Ayurveda is like, here, let's use this herb and let that be kind of a bridge to healing, so that you can have that little like instant gratification moment of I
Yeah.
feel better and hey, this works. And also, that can help us to have that bridge to the deeper work where we can feel that motivation. So there are, like you said, there's certainly a lot of things that we offer
Hmm.
therapeutic tools in the Vedic world, like mantra chanting and herbal medicine and mudra and all these things that can immediately start to build that bridge for people so they feel subjectively better,
Yeah.
while we also can help folks to shift those sometimes lifelong patterns. Like I know for me, I had decades long of patterns that
Mm.
had developed from my childhood, that were just habituated trauma responses that I didn't even know were there,
Yeah.
until somebody else working with me was able to say, hey, this is something that really is not innate to who you are. This
Hmm.
is something that you developed as a coping mechanism and you don't really need it anymore. And I was like, oh, great. Let's, okay. If I don't need
It's
it, let's
Good News Monday. Thanks.
something else. But sometimes you do need somebody. It's like, to me, asking for help can be empowering, provided that the person who's helping us has our empowerment, interest in mind. Like,
Hmm.
so that's another thing I do love about working with folks in Vedic healing, frameworks, because we're supporting folks and we're guiding them, but we're teaching them the tools that
Yeah.
they can use to ultimately apply to themselves and help themselves. So it's not like we're trying to keep people dependent on us and coming to us forever. We're trying to give them the tools that they're ready to use on their own to thrive, which I
Yeah.
really love, because, like, especially for folks with really significant trauma experiences, that sense of empowerment and reclaiming that is so important.
It's so important. And I think what you've described too is such a beautiful example of the distinction of like what we call the prakriti and the vikriti, right? So it's for those of you who aren't familiar, prakriti is your nature. We're just going to very short description. Prakriti is your nature. I call vikriti your nurture because anything we nurture becomes our our nature. But prakriti is really your inherent nature. And I know there are ways that for a good part of my life, I have really celebrated my Vikruti because it's gotten me places. I have accomplished things with it. You know, I have been successful at certain goals. I have obtained certain things. Um, and when I go into that place of my own healing and my own process and my own journey of life, it's like, wait, I really need to reflect on that. It's good that I have access to these parts of myself, and these parts of myself that I have nurtured, like my life depended on it for so long, are exactly what put me in the trajectory of my greatest imbalances that became my physical imbalances and my health issues, right? So that's really a big connection there, where we will have our true nature that we are born with. And and so what Ayurvedic medicine is doing is helping us recall and reclaim that. So it's already a system that says just inherently, no, you are this intelligent. This is your little fingerprint right there. That's what that looks like, and over time it's like getting little burns from the stove or something on that fingerprint, and that's the vikriti right there. But Ayurveda says, but you always have that intelligence. It's sort of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, like, that she's always had these slippers on. She's always had the power to go home. And she didn't even know it that whole time. And it's really no difference. It's really no different for us. So these patterns, they can be emotional, mental patterns, of course, thought forms that we consistently chronically have. They can become our worldview, they can become how we see ourselves, they can be our perspective and perceptions in relationships and with other people and jobs, to being how we manage stress, to being how they land in our body as something, and that's certainly what has happened to me. And that's not to say, I know there are people who end up with chronic illnesses or who have been born with chronic illnesses, and And I really honor that path too, because that's not an easy path. And there are, in my view, reasons why people go through stuff like that that are actually quite sacred and are another kind of spiritual learning journey back to what their health is. So that's the thing. We're not talking about health being you are a cisgendered, able-bodied, this weight, this color. Like, no, no, it really is that unique. It's how are you, whatever you came in with, are you going to function in your highest and best way so that you can live the life that you came here to live through your framework, through your doorway.
Exactly. Yeah, I love how you described it as the nature versus nurture, because I think that is a really easy way for people to understand it. And it really is about celebrating who we are and learning how to celebrate who we are in all of our aspects. So I think it is so important, because especially this being our first episode, that people do understand where we're coming from, and that we're not advocating one version of health, which is a big reason why you and I wanted to start doing this, because so much of the wellness world puts forth that image like there is some paradigm of health that we should all be aspiring to. And Ayurveda doesn't teach us that. Ayurveda teaches us that we are at our most healthy when we let ourselves discover what health is for us.
Yeah.
So it's like you said, if we come into the world with some condition, like I have diagnosed asthma since I was a child. Am I going to say I have asthma? No, I'm going to say I have the diagnosis of asthma. I have an
Yeah.
experience of asthma, right? Because
Yep.
I don't want to get my identity around that and limit myself. But also, I'm not going to pretend like it would be realistic for me to all of a sudden not experience that. Because if I come into the world with that,
Mm-hmm.
there's some process that's unfolding for me that if that process eventually ends, the asthma will disappear. And that also doesn't mean that I can't do things to cultivate my health in the meantime,
Yeah.
right? So my own best version of health does sometimes involve experience of asthma here and there. But I think it's so important for us to talk about this stuff, because it ties into the truth that we don't control all of our lives. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that this idea of health that the wellness industry so often puts forward, and this mythology that like there's this perfect state of health that everybody can have if they only work hard enough. There's so much shame in that, because we don't have control over everything in our lives. Like I can do the very best Ayurvedic healthcare for myself, which I do. I can create my whole life, respecting my needs and do all these amazing things, but I don't have control over air pollution. I don't have
Right.
control over like when there's wildfires in the environment and I go outside and asthma gets triggered. Like I don't get to control that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all have tendencies of our own body, and we all have ways that our own body will communicate with us that something needs, addressing. And so if I go outside as somebody whose lungs tend to that asthmatic, reaction when there's something that's not harmonious in my environment, if I go outside and there's a wildfire and my lung seize up, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, there's something wrong with me because, I must not be doing enough. I must not be trying hard enough, whatever. I can just say, I'm going to take my inhaler and go back inside. And I can just honor what I need in the moment instead of going into that whole shame spiral that I think a lot of the wellness world encourages us to go into,
Yeah.
because we're encouraged to buy into these, illusions that we could control every aspect of our life in such a way that we achieve whatever that perfect health is.
Mm-hmm.
And Ayurveda says, like, no, we are our most healthy when we celebrate who we are without trying to make ourselves different than we are.
Yeah.
So like we don't see people, like I've seen people who have heart conditions from birth, and they come to my practice and talk to me and they say, my doctor says I'm going to need some heart surgery. And I say, well, yeah, you will, because this, you came into the world with this, and it's okay to get
Yeah.
the surgery prevention.
Yeah.
There's no need to tell yourself that you should be doing more. You change your diet, you should do more things and more things and more things for the sake of avoiding this beautiful surgery that can just fix the problem.
Right.
You know, so these holistic, I think, integrated approaches to health, I think, are so important
Yeah.
because we can honor the best of everything that's available to us without going into that shame spiral place. And we can let ourselves experience the level of health that is aligned with who we are.
Mhm.
Like people who have neurodiversity and people who are autistic or people who's who are have the ADHD kind of brain function, we don't look at those things in Ayurveda and say they need to be fixed.
Right.
We don't say, let's make you different than you are. We
Right.
say, let's help you learn how to celebrate who you are.
Mhm.
Let's help you learn how to do things in a way that works for you.
Yeah.
And so we're helping people to really love themselves more and release all that shame stuff that we're encouraged to take on.
Mhm.
You know, I really think it's so important. I'm so happy that we're doing this because to me, that's such a big deal,
Yeah.
that it makes my heart feel so sad when I see
I
people,
know.
shaming themselves because it's like, oh, I got a cold. I must have done something wrong. It's like, you got a freaking virus. Like, you don't get to control who gives you a virus. Like, you can do your very best things, but the virus is there, man. Like, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting because I think, I think about, and I know we'll get into more of this stuff and we'll be sort of wrapping up here shortly, but um when I think about, I'll call it a methodology, like the law of attraction, for example, and everything sort of in that realm. I remember when it's funny, there was someone in my life at the time when the movie The Secret came out, or the book. I think it was the book first. I don't know, because I was never ever drawn to it or into it, but a friend gave me the book The Secret and I didn't even read it. I ended up just like giving it away because it didn't resonate with me. um no offense to anyone that it resonates with, because I do think it's kind of like the internet. It gives us access to certain things that are really wonderful, but we have to be super discerning and self-aware to know what's beneficial and what is not. And so there is a particular teacher, I'm not going to mention this teacher's name, um that people are just like cuckoo for cocoa puffs over right now, including some of like one of my closest friends actually. And I had a consultation with someone recently who had a diagnosis of something, and they said that basically they were just going to sign up for some retreats with said teacher and they were just going to get rid of it.
Oh,
And it really hit me. It deeply, deeply hit me, because that's, without using it in the marketing, that's really what this teacher represents in
yeah.
a lot of ways. Like you can have everything you want, you can be everything you want, which to a degree I think is true. And I will never be a 5 foot tall Asian woman.
Right.
I came in a certain way. There
Yeah.
is a framework for me
Right.
that was already declared, right? Like this is just true, and I'm okay with that. um so similar to what you're saying, like there are absolutely things that we can work with, and in Ayurveda we learn how to work with nature. We learn to honor nature and how we are a part of that, and how do we befriend it, how do we become such a part of it that it's sort of this synergy, like we see in nature, where collectively we become so much more than the sum of our parts when we're truly connecting with that, versus once again coming to this reductionistic place of essentially something's broken, but we can't say that it's broken. We're trying to fix a thing, but we're not calling it fix a thing. We're going to mind over matter, and we can only have positive thoughts when we do it, or otherwise it's not going to happen. So if it doesn't happen, that means you had some kind of negative thought somewhere in there. It's got to be your fault because this stuff really works. So what's wrong with you? Right?
Yeah.
And so this was all I was hearing when this person was talking to me. And, I think sometimes the challenge for me, I don't know how it is for you, but sometimes the challenge for me is also wanting to honor where people are in their own process, and not making them wrong for wanting to try something that they really feel called to do, because that was the last thing I wanted to do to this person. So the way that I felt called to handle it was just to invite them in and let them know that there are a variety of ways to work with these energies on
Mhm.
that exist on multiple different levels, um, that can be a part of this whole picture.
Mhm.
And so if they found that they were coming up short, or things weren't necessarily unfolding in the way that they wanted or thought they should, to not lose hope or faith that there were things that can be added to that to manage this and work with this illness. So I it's like, I think it is important, even as practitioners, that we can work with all, that we're not enabling things that will ultimately create more shame and harm to our clients slash patients. That is, to me, like the most sacred ground, is do not create more harm for the people who come to us. And sometimes that harm can be of, what are you thinking? That's not going to be good for you, right? It's like, I'm not
Yeah.
going to say that. And I too am going to work with the energy and gently just let you know, like, I'm not going anywhere if you decide that you need something a little bit different, or you're not getting what it is that you need in the way that you had hoped. Like, there's an integrity in that, because to me there's an integrity that's in this higher intelligence, and that's the field where I really like to work. And that's one of the things that you and I both say and feel deeply is missing. And not because there's a bunch of like ill-intentioned people. I mean, some people are, but I don't think that's true for a lot of people. I think they have very good intentions, and they have such a deep want to heal and to help people and to serve and to have prosperity doing that. There is nothing wrong with any of that. It's just, I think, being the most honoring of all the things is a more sustainable way for all of us to have a win-win-win, like across the board. Everyone gets to win in this system like we're talking about. And I don't feel like that's necessarily the case with a lot of the other things that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think that most people out there are intentionally causing harm. I think it's mostly done from just not knowing. I
Yes.
think that because of the way that the Vedic teachings have been so diluted, and I mean
Well,
throughout
and
I
colonized. I mean, they were taken over by the British, for God's sakes.
right.
Like,
I mean that's
sorry.
the no, but you're right. I mean we talk about
Ah,
it all the time. Like this is colonial effect, that
yes.
not only like it's very deliberate. It's not like this happened accidentally. It's literally that, that Britain colonized India and systematically tried to eradicate the indigenous medical system of Ayurveda. And
Yes.
like, it's not an accident that it got diluted or westernized. It was very purposeful and intentional. I had to write papers on this in school, and it wasn't even for Ayurveda school. This was for Western public health master's program that I wrote this paper on, like how, the colonization of Ayurvedic medicine changed the face of medicine in India, and what the cultural impacts have been and the public health impacts have been, because it's a system that is so accessible in rural settings. And in
Mhm.
rural settings, that was most of India when the British colonized. And so, when they said, we're going to make the urban centers the only place that we're teaching medicine, and we're going to establish our universities. And if you want to be recognized as legitimate, you have to come here and study here in our university in the city. Right. And so, I mean, they very intentionally did this. And so the Ayurveda that we started accessing in the Western world was this colonized form of Ayurveda. And so, people like me and you, people who want to access that more traditional form, I had to apprentice myself to a person in India to learn this. There wasn't in that time like a college of Ayurveda in the United States that I could go to. There was no such thing. So, I had to learn this by apprenticing myself to Ayurvedic physicians and Vedic spiritual teachers to teach me how to do this stuff. But people really want that wisdom. Yeah. And also, what folks are mostly encountering here in the Western world is the colonized form. Yeah. And so when you're encountering the colonized form and you think that that's what Ayurveda is, you don't know that it's not what it is, because you have these, people in authoritative Ayurveda schools and people who are conferring certificates and whatnot, and they're telling you this is what Ayurveda is. Or, you're in a yoga program and they send you to like a weekend on Ayurveda for your yoga teacher training. And then you think you know Ayurveda because you took 2 classes on it. But really, it's like, you know like a tiny percent, which is great. And I'm so excited that you're enthused about it. That's awesome. Yeah. But also it's like, if you don't know what you don't know, you don't know. So I think people are genuinely trying their best. But I mean, that is one of the reasons why you and I talked about offering this, podcast and putting this information out in a really public way so that people can find this more traditional wisdom that they're really seeking. Because I do believe that people are genuinely looking for this, but that the majority of what's out there is not this traditional wisdom that really I think people do genuinely want. Because I think you're right that people who are for the most part practicing Ayurveda and doing healing work, I think they do genuinely care about people and want to help them. So we're offering things that help people to, learn more about ways that they can help and to really access these authentic teachings to help themselves and others, which I think they are genuinely, looking for in that open-hearted way. So yeah, I do think it's important for us to be clear at the outset that we're not sitting here like up on our high horses, thinking we're better than everybody. Like, we're not saying our Ayurveda is better than everybody else's or anything like that. We're just saying there's more out there that maybe people don't know about yet. And we're people who are here who can teach it.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, I think sort of end what I want to say with this, but I think we've all had our own journey, because I know for myself, I started out very much more Western. I had some tastes of non-Western as well, without a doubt. But with like yoga being a big part of my background, it's rampant in the yoga asana world, I should say, the postures, the asana classes, like that kind of those trainings. This stuff is like rampant in there too. And so we're just going to be unfiltered. I'm going to share this about myself because now I'm like, oh my God, somebody help me. Thank God somebody did. But years ago, probably like 2006, I started studying with a school. And at some point, we'll talk about some of the schools and the places that maybe we would recommend versus not. Maybe we'll focus more on the ones that we would. Yeah. But I've had some experiences that I'll be happy to share about. There's one I'm still a little on fire about myself. I will share at some point. However, I digress. So I started studying at this one school, I think back in like 2006. And they had like a yoga asana program certification, meditation certification program, and an Ayurveda one. The Ayurveda one, I think it was probably 250 hours. I think each one of them were. So a decent amount of hours. I mean, still in Ayurveda, to me, it is an endless rabbit hole. So 250 hours of thousands of years of wisdom is like, okay, we got to start somewhere. Anyway, I ended up dropping out of that program because that was when I started to feel really appalled. Like, I could just feel that something was like it wasn't right. It was definitely the colonized version of things, even though I didn't have that language necessarily at the time. But it tripped me out because they were like, oh yeah, once you study all 3 of these things, you can call yourself a Vedic master. Whoa. And so, right. And at the time, I knew I felt like I had imposter syndrome with that. And I went into a different school that felt much more genuine to me. And I studied those same things. And it was like, yes, okay, then I must be a Vedic master. And that's where I go, eh. But slowly but surely I started to, and it felt weird saying it because I'm like, I feel
You're
like I
like
don't know
feeling
anything.
over here. I'm like, oh,
Right. I know. But see, what's funny is internally at the time, I was like, there's something just doesn't feel right about this. But for marketing reasons, maybe I need to say it. But there's something that really doesn't feel right about that because I don't feel like I know that much. I mean, yeah, I know some things, so it was like I had this whole thing going on in my psyche about this situation. And then I got to a point where it's like, I can't even say that. I can't say it.
yeah,
And as I got further and further along in my career, like much further, and I'm looking at the people that I hold in regard of being like, oh my God, if I could have like a drop of what these people have, holy crap, I could listen to them all day long. Right. And I'm like, and I called myself a Vedic master all that time ago. This is this is happening everywhere. And there are my intentions were never bad.
it's
And I
not.
and I could feel like we talk about the body never lying. Like my internal gauge didn't feel right about it, but I was being told something different. And that's happening everywhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like in the Vedic world, you're taught that you never ever call yourself a Vedic master. You're always a
A
student of the Veda.
student.
No
Yes,
matter how long you've studied, no matter what your title is, you're always a student
you're
of the Veda.
not an expert either. Like screw that
Right.
word. Hello.
But then
Not a
like,
yeah.
right. But then if we come to the West and we call ourselves a student of the Vedas, there's no cultural context for that here because
Womp
people look
womp
at
womp
student, right?
womp. You
They're like,
haven't
oh,
arrived.
well, they're just a student. They don't know anything. But for the Vedic world, it's like, oh, they know what they're doing because
Right.
they're not
Yeah.
they're
Right.
not claiming master. They know. Because if
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
Vedic world, if you say I'm a student of the Vedas, they're like, oh, that's the real deal.
That's a real deal. Yeah. Yeah, same with yoga teaching, asana teaching. Like it's like no, and my husband and I, we used to have a yoga studio. We'll get into that chapter of our life because wow, it was a lot of learning. We'll get there. But he and I had a running joke where it was like, okay, we're going to put advanced yoga on the schedule and we're going to have people come into a meditation class where everybody's just quiet because that's advanced yoga. And I don't think they're getting the point. Right. So it's like, it is just so it's so different because here, if you're not an expert or a master, then people are gonna be like, well, okay, well, who can I go to that actually knows what they're talking about? And it's like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, because it's like there's no cultural context here to acknowledge that lifelong learning is a value
Yeah.
that we can because and that's also why I think a lot of people study like Ayurveda and they graduate, they feel like they're not ready to use it. Some of it is because the schools aren't really teaching them application, they're teaching them memorization, and there is no really understanding of how to use it. But there's also the issue that, there's a lack of confidence because there is that idea that we have to be an expert. But it's like when you're trying to be a physician, you go through school, but then you go through an internship and you get practice and you get supervised and you hone your experience through application. And that's really like, when you graduate from Ayurveda school, I mean, at least the way that I did it, we did have to do an internship and a supervised thing, but,
Mm-hmm.
but there needs to be, I think, some acknowledgement of wisdom developed through application and practice, because we really can't expect that we're just going to accumulate all this stuff in our minds and then like, oh, I'm good, I know it all. Because then when that expectation isn't met and we have all that memorized information, but we don't know how to do it all, we feel like we failed,
Yeah.
you know?
It's another way that it's a medicine of experience. That's
Yeah,
both of our own internal experience and it's having experiences.
exactly. Because we haven't
Yeah.
failed. We just need to practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I feel like we have been talking for about an hour.
Goes by so fast. I think this is good. I think the only other thing I would want to say to people is just to kind of let everybody know where we're coming from, in that we are Vedic teachers, but we're also very inclusive, which we recognize is not super common in some,
Mhm.
aspects of the Vedic world. And especially, there can be a lot of, sexist things. There can be a lot of homophobia. There can be a lot of non-inclusivity.
Mhm.
And so I do think it's important for us just to be super clear that we're,
Yeah.
because we are coming from lineages that are more inclusive in nature, I think it's important for people to know that, so that anybody who's showing up and listening knows that they're safe to be who they are. Like, we're going to support everybody to have their authentic gender expression, whatever that is. We're going to support people to have their authentic sexual identity, whatever that is. So we're not going to ever be here telling people to be something they're not.
Yeah.
And everybody, these teachings and this podcast that we're creating is something that anybody is safe to attend.
Yes.
And I think it's important just for people to hear that, especially, as things get increasingly polarized in our world. I think people just need to hear that this is a place where everybody's accepted, and not only accepted, but I would say celebrated. That
Totally.
we're,
Yeah.
we're we're okay with whoever you are as you're listening. Whoever you are is great with us, and we love
Yeah.
you, and we're celebrating you.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. I think that's sort of, it's definitely a place where you and I have always come together, and we really value um, just other beings on the path, whatever costume you're wearing. Because I always just see this as just like a costume party.
Yeah.
It's like, it's all one big costume party. And ultimately, we know who we are. And we know on some level, whether it's super conscious or not, the parts of us that need to just be expressed, because that full expression of self is really where our health lies. And so it doesn't matter if you're in a wheelchair for your life. It's not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't mean that you can't be healthy, vibrant,
Yeah.
happy, content, expressive, creative. Like there's no shortage of the intelligence of the entire creative process in you. And that's, I think, what we celebrate the most, is that when people, with just people in general, like you and I feel like really spot divinity in
Yeah.
whatever form it's decided to take in front of us. And that's something that I hold really sacred.
Yeah, me too. And I do, I tear up a little bit when I talk about this, because it's so close to my heart that,
Yeah.
that there are so many people I work with who just need a safe space and never get it until they are sitting in a session with me.
Yeah.
And I know you have that too, because you're a safe space for people as well. And it's not that people's stories don't matter. It's not that people's experiences don't matter. Like, we're not sitting here saying your experiences aren't valid, and so it's all the same. But we're really saying the opposite of that, that everybody's lived experience and story does matter, and that these teachings help us to access our most joyful, exciting, celebratory, sacred life as we are right now, right? Like,
Yeah.
however it is, whoever we are. And we come from non-dual lineages, and so that means, like, we're not talking about gender divinity. We're not talking about, like, binary gender constructs and further enforcing those. We're saying, we're here to break out of all that.
Yeah.
There are functional constructs that we live with in daily life, but fundamentally, that's all they are. It's categorical constructs that serve certain purposes at certain times, but none of them are ultimate truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There's still, at the end of the day, there's something we've decided because it works for our life, that we could always make a different choice.
yeah. And
So,
so whoever's here, whoever's showing up to listen, it's okay.
yeah. And thank you for being here. The other thing I want to add before we go is, if there are topics that you would like us to talk about, or if there are questions that you have about anything that you hear on our show at any time, you are welcome to email us at vedicwisdomunfiltered@gmail.com. We will get to that, and we will certainly include it in the show. So anything that you feel like you need to share, or if you just need a safe place to send a letter, that thing that you just need to write and you need to get it out to someone who will just be a witness for you, we are happy to receive those as well and just hold them with you. So we do have that email available. It's Vedic Wisdom Unfiltered, the name of the show, at gmail.com. And we both will be taking a look. So I guess until next time, we're gonna
Yep.
sign off.
Yep, I think we're good to go for now. So yeah, send us your questions. If there's anything you want us to talk about in the Vedic world, send us topics, anything about yoga, Ayurveda, whatever want us to talk about and address that you would find interesting and fun, or confusing things that you think are bullshit, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Send it to us. We'll be happy to discuss.
Yes, for sure. We may not have all the answers, but we will certainly be happy to discuss it.
That's right. We're happy to open that can of worms.
Worms with us become confetti. It's fine. Fine. All right. Well, thank you for listening. I'm so grateful to have these conversations with you, and I'm excited already for our next one.
Yeah, me too. Bye, everybody. Lots of love. Mwah.
Bye.